My MIL mocked me as a freeloader SAHM and pushed my husband to control my money. So he exposed the truth. The house she lives in rent-free is mine. Can you imagine someone spending years trying to tear down your marriage, constantly calling you a freeloader, only to have them discover they were actually living under your roof the entire time? Because that's exactly what happened to me. And trust me, the look on her face when she realized was absolutely priceless. Look, being a stay-at-home mom was never some default setting for me. My husband, bless his heart, and we talked about it deeply. We crunched the numbers, considered our priorities, and honestly, with childcare costs skyrocketing, it just made solid sense for me to be home with our kids. My husband? He was always my biggest supporter, constantly telling me how much he appreciated everything I did. He never made me feel less than. But his mother? Oh, Mill. She was a different story entirely. She prided herself on being this fiercely independent, career-driven woman, and in her eyes, that meant looking down on anyone who didn't clock in for a paycheck. From day one, she made these incredibly snide remarks about me living off her son, practically painting me as some kind of gold digger. Never mind that my husband and I had been together for ages, long before he even had a career to speak of. At first, I tried to ignore it. I really did. But her comments, they just became harder and harder to brush off. Every single time we visited, she'd find a way to subtly jab. She'd bring up other women, balancing motherhood and a demanding job, with a dramatic sigh, always implying my husband was some kind of martyr. If I bought myself a new shirt, she'd comment, "Oh, how nice it must be to spend her son's hard-earned money." It didn't matter that our finances were joint, or that my husband had zero complaints. Mill had made up her mind. I was a burden. Then she took it a step further. One evening, my husband came home, looking utterly drained. I knew something was wrong. After some coaxing, he admitted his mother had called him, full of concerns. Apparently, she'd spent a significant chunk of the conversation trying to convince him I was taking advantage, that it wasn't fair for me to stay home while he worked. And then, she suggested he limit my spending, to encourage responsibility. I just stared at him. I was waiting, desperate to hear how he'd shut her down, how he'd defended me. But he hadn't. He told me he mostly listened without agreeing or disagreeing. And that, my friend, stung. It meant a small, terrifying part of him was actually considering her words. I wasn't mad, not truly, but I was deeply, profoundly hurt. After everything I did, raising our kids, running our entire household, taking care of all the little things he never even had to think about, he was letting her get to him. I could have exploded. I could have fought back right then and there, defending myself, pointing out how absolutely ridiculous it was for her to interfere in our marriage. But instead, I did something else entirely. I let it go, not because I was okay with it, but because I knew, with absolute certainty, that the best way to handle Mill was to give her all the rope she needed to hang herself. So, I just smiled at my husband. I told him, "If you think we need to talk about finances, we absolutely can." He looked relieved, thinking I was being reasonable. But in reality, I was just waiting. Because I knew something Mill didn't. Something that was about to flip her entire world upside down. And I couldn't wait to watch it unfold. Update 1 asterisk after my husband's concerned talk with his mother, he was definitely mulling over her words. He was quieter, more thoughtful, like a dark cloud was hanging over him. I didn't push. I didn't argue. I just watched. I wanted to see how far Mill would take this. If she wanted to paint me as a freeloader, fine. I'd let her believe it. I'd let her dig her own hole as deep as she possibly could. A few days later, he hesitantly brought it up. "Maybe we should revisit our finances," he said, his tone incredibly careful, like he was stepping on eggshells. He even mentioned, now that the kids are getting older, maybe I could contribute more financially. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Our kids were tiny, nowhere near old enough to be left alone. Yet, somehow, Mill had convinced him I was just sitting around, doing nothing, while he toiled away. Instead of getting defensive, I leaned right into it. "You know what?" I said, with a perfectly calm smile. "If you think it's necessary, I'll absolutely consider picking up some extra financial responsibilities. I could even take on a few bills if that would make you feel better." He looked genuinely surprised, almost guilty. He knew, deep down, this wasn't his idea. This was pure Mill manipulation. Still, he went along with it, assuring me it wasn't about punishing me, but about fairness. I just smiled, agreed, and waited. Update 2 asterisk Mill must have been absolutely giddy, thinking she had won. She suddenly became even bolder, making these awful, offhand comments about how glad she was that I was finally realizing I needed to pull my weight. She even started suggesting little side hustles for me: online tutoring, freelance writing, baking cakes, even babysitting other people's kids since I was already home anyway. She phrased it all in the most patronizing, condescending way possible, like she was doing me a favor by offering these helpful suggestions for how I could finally be useful. And every single time, I just nodded. I humored her. Oh, yes, I'll definitely look into some remote work. Budgeting more carefully is a brilliant idea. I completely understand how difficult it must be for my husband to be the sole breadwinner. She ate it all up, hook, line, and sinker. She thought she had me exactly where she wanted me, but she had no idea what was coming. Update 3 asterisk A few weeks later, my husband and I were visiting Mill at her house. As always, she found a way to bring up money. But this time, she got unbelievably bold. She outright suggested that my husband start handling our household budget himself, just to ensure I wasn't overspending. I felt my husband stiffen beside me. That was the first sign. She had gone too far. He let out a slow, deliberate breath, rubbing his temple like he was utterly exhausted. And then, before I could even respond, he said something that made Mill's smug expression disappear in an instant. He told her that if she was so concerned about fairness, then maybe it was time they had an honest conversation about finances, starting with her own living situation. Mill blinked. She was utterly confused. She even laughed nervously, asking what he meant. He didn't sugarcoat it. He reminded her that she had been living comfortably in her house for years, never once paying a dime in rent. She was always so quick to judge other people's financial situations, yet she had never once questioned why she wasn't expected to contribute to her own housing costs. She still didn't get it. She waved him off, saying, "Oh, that's different. I'm living in my son's home." That's when my husband delivered the final, devastating blow. He told her, point blank, "It's not my house." Mill's entire body went absolutely still. She stared at him, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. She let out a forced chuckle, shaking her head, telling him to stop joking. He didn't laugh back. He just repeated himself, more firmly this time. "It's not my house. It has never been my house." Mill looked at me then, her expression darkening as if she was finally starting to understand. Her voice was higher-pitched now, a little desperate, as she asked who the house belonged to. My husband didn't hesitate. He told her the truth. The house is hers. For a moment, there was just complete, deafening silence. Mill opened her mouth, then closed it again, like she couldn't quite form words. She turned back to my husband as if hoping he'd take it back, but he just looked at her with this tired, worn expression. Mill's face drained of all color. Her lips parted slightly, and for the first time in a very, very long time, she was absolutely speechless. She had spent weeks, months, calling me a leech, a moocher, someone living off her son's hard work. But the entire time, she had been living under my roof, completely, blissfully unaware of it. I just sat back and watched, letting the reality sink in for her. She wanted fairness? Oh, she was about to get it, and it was going to be on my terms. For a few more moments, Mill just sat there, blinking in stunned silence, like her brain was struggling to process the information. She kept looking between me and my husband, waiting for one of us to say it was all some kind of joke. But neither of us did. She let out another nervous laugh, shaking her head, trying to dismiss the entire thing. She told my husband it wasn't possible, that this was his house. She tried to recover, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She said, "Of course, this is just a misunderstanding. You two are married. Naturally, it belongs to him." My husband cut in before I could even respond. His tone was neutral, but there was a sharp edge to it that Mill couldn't possibly miss. He told her that it didn't really matter what she assumed. The fact remained, the house belonged to me. Mill's fingers clenched against the armrest of the couch. She forced out another chuckle, waving her hand dismissively. She said that was fine. It didn't really change anything. It wasn't like I was going to suddenly kick her out. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on my knees. "Actually," I said, my voice calm, almost sweet, "I've been thinking about fairness a lot lately. Since you've been so concerned about everyone pulling their weight financially, I figured it's only right that you start contributing as well." Her smile faltered. She let out another forced laugh, telling me to stop joking. I didn't laugh back. I just looked her straight in the eye and told her, "I'm not joking. Since you're living in my house, it's only fair that you start paying rent." Mill's entire face went pale. Her lips parted slightly as if she was about to argue, but no words came out. She turned to my husband, expecting him to step in, to save her, but he just sighed and shook his head, telling her, "It's the least you can do, Mom." She sputtered, trying to grasp at anything that would make this conversation disappear. She told us she was family. "Surely," she stammered, "you weren't expecting her to actually pay rent to live in her own home?" I raised an eyebrow and reminded her that legally, it wasn't her home. It was mine. Her breathing grew uneven as she stammered out that this was different, that she wasn't some tenant. She was his mother. I nodded, pretending to be understanding. "I completely get it," I said. "It's an emotional situation. That's why I'm willing to be flexible. Instead of treating you like a regular tenant, I'm offering you a discounted rent. Far less than you'd pay trying to find another place in this economy." Her expression twisted, her nostrils flaring as she muttered, "I can't believe this is happening." I shrugged. "I'm only following your advice, Mel. You've been very vocal about how everyone needs to contribute more. So, this is me taking your words seriously." She stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief, as if she couldn't comprehend how I had just flipped the entire situation onto her. She shook her head furiously. She said that maybe she had been a little harsh before, but she hadn't meant any harm. She was just looking out for her son. She admitted that maybe she had misunderstood things, and she could see now that I wasn't really freeloading. I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. "Thank you for finally realizing that," I said. "So, about the rent. Would you prefer to pay monthly, or should we set up automatic payments?" Her face twisted. She stammered out that she didn't think rent was necessary now that we had cleared things up. I tilted my head. "But Mill, you've been so passionate about fairness. Surely you wouldn't want to live somewhere without contributing? Not when you've been so worried about my financial input." Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. She was trapped, and she knew it. She looked to my husband, pleading silently, but he didn't move a muscle. His voice was firm. "She's right, Mom. If you want to talk about fairness, then you need to be fair, too." Her body slumped slightly, like all the fight had been drained out of her. She mumbled something about needing time to think, then quickly excused herself from the room. I could hear her pacing in the kitchen, probably trying to figure out a way to undo the damage. My husband looked at me, a strange mix of relief and exhaustion on his face. He said he'd never seen his mother look so lost before. "Only fair," I told him, with a quiet smile. Then he asked what I would do if she actually agreed to pay rent. "She has two options," I said. "And it's a good thing you brought that up, because we need to revisit our little finance talk, too." He looked a little uncomfortable. He didn't really think I was going to let him off the hook that easily, did he? Update 4 asterisk, I didn't expect an apology from Mel. I knew her pride wouldn't let her, at least not immediately. But I did expect some kind of backlash. And I was absolutely right. That very evening, after we'd left her house, I suspected she was already on the phone, trying to rally other family members to her side. I wasn't worried. The truth was on my side. The next morning, I received a text from my sister-in-law. She asked what had happened, because their mother had called her in a fit, saying that I had tricked her and humiliated her in front of my husband. I almost laughed out loud at how twisted she had made the story sound. I simply texted back. My husband told her the truth, nothing more, nothing less. By the afternoon, the guilt tripping had begun in earnest. My mother-in-law started sending passive-aggressive messages, acting as if she was the real victim in all this. She said she couldn't believe I had let her live under the illusion that this was her home, that I had made her feel secure, and then pulled the rug out from under her. She asked how I could be so cruel. I stared at that message for a long time before finally responding. I told her that she was welcome to stay in the house. After all, I had never once threatened to kick her out. But if she truly wanted to see my contributions increase, she could start paying rent. She didn't respond for hours. And when she finally did, it wasn't through text. A letter arrived in the mail 2 days later, addressed to me, in her shaky handwriting. It was the most half-hearted apology I had ever read. She said she was sorry if she had upset me, but she had only wanted what was best for her son. She said she never meant to make me feel unappreciated, but that she just had old-fashioned views on how marriage should work. She ended the letter with a plea, asking me to reconsider the rent situation, claiming she was a widow and that her late husband had never wanted her to struggle financially. I folded the letter and set it aside. My decision was already made. She wanted me to increase my contribution? Fine. I was giving her the opportunity to contribute as well. If she had truly seen herself as the lady of the house, then she could start acting like one. Update 5 asterisk after sending my mother-in-law's pathetic letter straight into a drawer where forgotten things went to die, I decided it was time to have a real conversation with my husband. He had defended me, sure, but I wasn't going to just let the way he initially entertained his mother's complaints slide. He had let her get too comfortable meddling in our marriage, and that wasn't something I could ignore. That night, after we put the kids to bed, I sat him down at the kitchen table. My fingers tapped lightly on the surface as I let out a sigh. I've given our finances some serious thought, I told him, and I've decided it's time for me to go back to work. The way his head snapped up made it almost comical. His eyes widened in pure shock, and for a second, he just stared at me like I had completely lost my mind. He asked me what I meant, why I would need to do something so drastic. I just shrugged, keeping my tone perfectly even. Well, since your mother was so concerned about my contributions, I figured it was only fair that I get a real job. One that pays. One that makes it crystal clear I'm not just mooching off you. His jaw tightened, and I saw his hands clench into small fists. You don't need to do that, he said quickly. You know we already agreed this arrangement works for both of us. Our family is in a good place because you're able to be home with the kids. I leaned back in my chair and folded my arms, tilting my head slightly. Is that true? I asked him, my voice dangerously quiet. Then why did you let your mother talk about me like I was some freeloader? Why did you sit there, humoring her complaints, acting like I needed to justify my worth in our marriage? His face paled slightly, and I could see him struggling to find an answer. He rubbed the back of his neck, then let out a heavy sigh. He finally admitted that he had stepped out of line. He said he was sorry, that he should have shut his mother down the first time she brought it up, instead of letting it drag out as long as it did. But I didn't let him off that easily. You let someone else meddle in our marriage once, I pointed out. That means you could do it again. Trust isn't just about being faithful, you know? It's about knowing your partner won't allow outside influences to dictate your relationship. Your mother had no business being in our finances, and yet, you let her have an opinion. His lips pressed together in a tight line, and he looked incredibly guilty. He said he hadn't realized how much he had let her words get to him. He admitted that, at first, he thought she was just expressing concern, but now he could see how much she had been manipulating the situation. He even said he hated that he had made me feel like I needed to prove myself. I nodded, satisfied that he was finally starting to understand, but I wasn't done yet. I brought up the fact that I had been looking through our finances recently, and I had noticed just how much money he had been sending his mother every single month. That part caught him completely off guard. He hesitated before asking what I meant. I pulled up the numbers on my phone and slid it across the table toward him. I told him I had seen the transactions, the regular payments, the amount that was going directly to his mother for no real reason. I asked him how long he planned to keep that up. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. He said that she was his mother, that she was a widow, and he had just wanted to make sure she was comfortable. I let out a slow breath. Well, I told him, my voice firm, things are going to change. Since I'm apparently expected to contribute more, I've already made the decision. Your mother is going to have to start contributing too. And that means the money you've been sending to her? It's now going to go to a caretaker instead. Because if I'm going to work, we're going to need someone to help with the kids and the house. He looked completely torn, like he didn't know whether to be upset or ashamed. He said he had never really thought about it that way, that he had just been so used to taking care of his mother, that he hadn't considered how unfair it was to keep prioritizing her over our own household. I told him that I understood wanting to take care of family, but his mother was not his responsibility the way our children were. She had lived in that house for years, rent-free, without lifting a finger, all while criticizing me for supposedly taking advantage of him. I wasn't going to let that continue. He ran a hand through his hair, still looking frustrated with himself, but I could tell he was finally coming to terms with it. He let out a sigh and said I was right, that he had been enabling her, and that it needed to stop. I felt like we were finally on the same page, but you never know with men. I'll definitely be keeping an eye on him. Update 6 asterisk. The very next morning, I decided it was time to stop dragging things out. I had let my mother-in-law's arrogance slide for years, but after everything she had done, I wasn't going to keep enabling her. If she wanted to act like she was above everyone else, then she could figure out how to survive on her own. I called her. No pleasantries. I got straight to the point. I told her she needed to start paying rent. And I wasn't talking about some discounted family rate, either. If she didn't have this month's payment ready, then she could start looking for another place to live, because I was going to list my house for rent. For a few seconds, there was nothing but stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then she let out an indignant laugh, like she genuinely thought I was joking. She asked me what kind of daughter-in-law did something like this to her husband's mother, saying that I had no right to kick her out of her own home. I reminded her, calmly, that the house was mine, bought long before I had even met her son. I told her she wasn't entitled to a free ride just because she had decided to rewrite history and act like this was some family estate. She had lived there rent-free for years while having the audacity to accuse me of taking advantage of her son. If she couldn't come up with the money, then she needed to find another arrangement. She started sputtering, saying that it wasn't fair, that I was being cruel and unreasonable. She said that she didn't have that kind of money just lying around. That's when my husband, who had been sitting nearby, listening to everything, took the phone from my hand. He told his mother that he was also cutting off the monthly payments he had been sending her. Since I was going back to work, we needed to hire a caretaker, and that money was going to go toward taking care of our own family. The way she screeched was so loud that I could hear it even without the phone on speaker. She yelled that I couldn't do this, that I didn't have the right to just throw her out like some stranger. She accused me of turning her son against her, of ruining her life. I stayed completely calm and told her that if she had been a little less arrogant while living off someone else, maybe she wouldn't be in this situation. She had spent so much time looking down on me, acting like I was some burden on her son, when in reality, she had been the one bleeding him dry. She tried to argue, tried to pull out every manipulative tactic she had, but I wasn't budging. I reminded her that she wasn't some helpless woman with no options. Her late husband had left her money, and she had savings she could dip into. And if that wasn't enough, then she could do what everyone else in the world did when they needed money, get a job. At that, she completely lost it. She screamed that she was too old to work, that I was being vindictive, that I was trying to ruin her life just because of one misunderstanding. She kept saying that I needed to be reasonable, that family didn't do this to each other. I cut her off. Family doesn't undermine each other's marriages, I told her. Family doesn't try to paint someone as a gold digger while living off them for free. Family doesn't expect endless handouts while treating people like dirt. If you want to stay in that house, you pay up. That was the end of the discussion. I hung up before she could say anything else. I knew she'd call back, probably a dozen times, but I wasn't going to waste my energy listening to her tantrums. I had said my piece. Now it was up to her to figure out what she was going to do. My husband let out a long sigh and ran a hand down his face. He looked utterly drained, but I could tell he also felt this immense relief, like he had finally broken free from whatever hold his mother had on him. He said he should have done this a long time ago, that she had always acted like she was helpless, but deep down, she was just someone who expected to be taken care of without ever giving anything in return. I told him that as long as she was in that house, we needed to hold firm. No more giving in, no more bending to her will. If she wanted to live there, she needed to pay for it. And if she didn't, then she could pack her bags and find somewhere else to go. The next few days were tense, to say the least. My mother-in-law tried every trick in the book, calling other family members to guilt us, acting like she was on the verge of homelessness, even pretending to have sudden health issues. But no one was buying it. Everyone knew she had money, and everyone knew she had done this to herself. A week later, she finally sent over the rent payment. It wasn't a pleasant victory, not in the traditional sense, but it was still a victory. She had spent years looking down on me, calling me a freeloader, but in the end, she was the one who had to pay up. And honestly, it felt pretty damn good. She should be happy I didn't ask for a deposit. Update 7 asterisk. A few months later, I finally had some genuinely good news to share. I got a job. It wasn't anything flashy, but it paid well, had decent hours, and most importantly, it gave me back the independence I'd wanted. It felt incredibly good to know that I wasn't just staying home, constantly being scrutinized for every dollar I spent, like I had to prove my worth in my own marriage. Some people had suggested, "Oh, maybe you should just pay your mother-in-law to watch the kids. That way, she can contribute something, and you can keep the money in the family." I had one answer for that, and it was a resounding, absolutely not. There was no way I was going to let that woman be anywhere near my kids for extended periods, much less let her have any influence over them. I knew exactly how she talked about me when she thought I wasn't listening, and I wasn't about to let my children grow up hearing her garbage, planting the idea in their heads that their own mother was some lazy gold digger, or that they owed her something just because she was their grandmother. Besides, I didn't want her in my house more than absolutely necessary. If she was already this unbearable while living separately, I certainly wasn't going to invite more chaos into my life. So no, I wasn't going to let my mother-in-law watch my kids. That woman had spent years looking down on me, and now she had to sit with the reality that I had created for her. She had wanted me to contribute more? Well, I was working now. But instead of funding her entitled lifestyle, my money would be going toward giving my children a safe, happy home, one that she had no part in shaping. And honestly, looking back, that was the best decision I could have ever made.